People often ask me when I stopped believing I belonged to my own family. Most people think it happened the day my parents left my high school graduation before my name was called. Others assume it was the morning. I packed my car and disappeared without leaving a forwarding address. They're both wrong. It happened when I was 8 years old, standing barefoot on the front porch of my aunt's old farmhouse, watching my parents' SUV disappear down a dusty road, while my older brother waved excitedly through the back window. That was the first summer they left me behind. Unfortunately, it wasn't the last. My name is Claire Bennett, and I grew up believing every family had one child who mattered a little more than the others. In my family, that child was my brother Ethan. If he wanted pancakes, we had pancakes. If he wanted pizza, everyone ate pizza. If he felt tired, the whole house became quiet. Everything revolved around him. At first, I didn't question it. Because when you're little, you don't know the difference between love and habit. You simply accept whatever your parents call normal. Ethan had survived a serious heart condition when he was 5. Doctors said he was lucky to be alive. My parents spent years sleeping in hospital chairs, praying beside machines, and wondering if he'd make it through another surgery. He did, and thank God he did. No child deserves that kind of pain. But after he recovered, something inside our family never healed. The hospital disappeared. The fear remained. My parents treated every single day as if they owed Ethan another perfect memory. Without realizing it, they started stealing those memories from me. The first summer happened without any warning. One afternoon, I came home from school and found a bright blue suitcase sitting on my bed. Mom smiled. Maybe she would say I'd join them later. Maybe she'd explain it was only for a week. Instead, she zipped the suitcase closed. You're such an easy child. I knew you'd understand. I didn't understand. I simply stopped asking questions. The next morning, Dad loaded my suitcase into the trunk. 5 hours later, we arrived at Aunt Rose's farmhouse near a quiet lake. She hugged me tightly. Too tightly, as if she already knew why I was there. My parents stayed for coffee. Mom kissed my forehead. Dad ruffled my hair. Then they climbed back into the SUV. I still remember the last thing Mom said before closing the door. Be a good girl. Don't make this harder. Harder for who? I wanted to ask. But the engine had already started. The tires rolled away, and I stood there, holding a stuffed rabbit, watching my family disappear. That night, I cried into my pillow. Aunt Rose quietly sat beside me without saying a word. She simply held my hand until I fell asleep. Looking back, she never tried to convince me everything would be okay. Because unlike my parents, she respected the truth. She knew it wasn't okay. A week later, a postcard arrived. It showed Disneyland, fireworks, smiling children, my brother wearing Mickey Mouse ears. On the back, Mom had written only one sentence. Wish you were here. I read those 4 words at least 20 times. If they wished I were there, why didn't they bring me 8-year-old children ask impossible questions? Adults usually answer them with silence. The same thing happened the following year. Another suitcase, another goodbye, another vacation without me. Florida, Colorado, Hawaii, New York. Every June, I went to Aunt Rose. Every July, another postcard arrived. Every August, my parents came back suntanned, smiling, carrying souvenirs that never quite fit me. Eventually, I stopped waiting by the window, because disappointment becomes easier when you schedule it. School made everything worse. Every September, teachers asked us to share stories about summer vacation. My classmates talked about beaches, theme parks, cruises, airplanes. I talked about feeding chickens, baking apple pies, and reading books beside Aunt Rose's lake. My classmates thought my summers sounded peaceful. They didn't know those peaceful summers existed because my own family had decided there wasn't room for me. The saddest part wasn't being away. The saddest part was realizing nobody at home seemed to miss me. One evening when I was 10, I finally found enough courage to ask, Mom, can I come with you this year? She didn't even stop folding clothes. This trip is expensive. I nodded. I won't ask for anything, she sighed. It's not about money. Then why? She finally looked at me. Because your brother deserves this after everything he's been through. I wanted to say, I've been through losing my family, but I swallowed the words. Dad stood in the doorway listening. He never defended me. He never agreed with Mom either. He simply stayed quiet. Sometimes silence hurts more than cruel words. That night, I looked downstairs before going to bed. My suitcase was already waiting beside the front door. No one had asked whether I still wanted to go. The decision had been made before I ever opened my mouth. At that moment, something inside me quietly changed. I stopped trying to be chosen. Instead, I started wondering what life might look like if I chose myself instead. After that summer, I never asked to go on another family vacation. Not because I stopped dreaming. Because I finally understood that some invitations were never meant for me. Every June, my blue suitcase waited beside the front door before I even finished packing my school bag. The decision had already been made. It always was. By the time I turned 11, I knew the routine by heart. Dad would drive. Mom would spend the entire trip talking about all the exciting places they were planning to visit with Ethan. Disney World, Yellowstone, the Grand Canyon, New York City. I sat quietly in the back seat, pretending to read while secretly listening to every plan I wasn't part of. 5 hours later, we'd arrive at Aunt Rose's farmhouse. She'd hug me tightly. My parents would stay just long enough for coffee. Then they'd leave. Every single year, I watched the same cloud of dust disappear down that country road. Eventually, I stopped waving goodbye. If my parents made me feel invisible, Aunt Rose did the exact opposite. Her little farmhouse wasn't fancy. The roof leaked during heavy rain. The porch creaked with every step. The kitchen windows never closed properly. But somehow, it felt warmer than the beautiful house I called home. She owned a small bakery in town. Nothing expensive, just homemade bread, cookies, pies, and cinnamon rolls. The moment I turned 12, she tied a tiny apron around my waist and smiled. Every baker burns her first batch, so don't be afraid to make mistakes. Nobody had ever spoken to me like that before. At home, mistakes were something to apologize for. With Aunt Rose, mistakes were simply lessons waiting to happen. By 13, I could bake almost everything she sold. Customers started asking for me. Is Claire working today? One elderly man refused to buy apple pie unless I had baked it myself. Every compliment felt strange, not because I didn't enjoy it, but because I wasn't used to people noticing me. One afternoon, Aunt Rose placed today's earnings on the counter. She slid $20 toward me. You earned it. I immediately pushed it back. I was only helping. She smiled. No, sweetheart. You were working. And hard work deserves respect. It was the first money anyone had ever paid me. I kept that $20 bill inside my diary for years, not because of its value, but because it proved something I'd never believed before. I was capable of building something on my own. The older I became, the harder it was to go back home each September. The farmhouse felt like peace. Home felt like waiting for permission to exist. One evening when I was 14, I accidentally overheard Aunt Rose talking on the phone. She didn't know I was standing outside the kitchen door. I'll raise her, Aunt Rose said. I'll pay for everything. She deserves to grow up somewhere she's actually seen. There was a long silence. Then Aunt Rose sighed. So that's your final answer? Another silence. I understand. She slowly hung up. When she turned around and saw me standing there, her eyes filled with guilt. I never asked who she had been talking to. I already knew. It was my mother. That night, I cried quietly beneath my blanket. Not because Mom had said no. Teachers called me mature. Neighbors called me independent. They had no idea independence often begins as loneliness. By 15, I'd learned something dangerous. If nobody expects anything from you, you can prepare your escape without anyone noticing. That's exactly what I started doing. I found a part-time job washing dishes at a small diner after school. Mom barely looked up when I mentioned it. Good. It'll teach responsibility. She never asked where my paycheck went. Every dollar was hidden inside an old cookie, tin beneath a loose floorboard in my closet. At first, there were only a few $100s, then 1,000, then 3,000. With every paycheck, my confidence grew. I wasn't saving money, I was saving freedom. That summer before my senior year, something happened that changed everything. Business at Aunt Rose's bakery had been slow. One Saturday morning, I created a new recipe using blueberries from her garden and a cinnamon crumble topping. A customer bought one slice, then another. By noon, every pie was sold out. The following weekend, people lined up before the bakery even opened. "Just for that pie." Aunt Rose laughed as she counted the register. "You've got a gift, Claire." "No, you've got a future." Those words stayed with me long after summer ended. Because for the first time, I could actually see one. Not the future my parents had planned. Mine. The day before school started, Aunt Rose handed me a small envelope before Dad arrived. Inside was $500. I immediately tried to return it. "I can't take this." She gently closed my hand around it. "This isn't charity. It's an investment. In your future?" Then she hugged me tighter than ever before. As Dad loaded my suitcase into the car, she whispered something I'll never forget. "When the day comes, choose happiness over guilt." I didn't fully understand what she meant. Not yet, but somehow, I knew that day was getting closer. Much closer. The day I graduated from high school. Everyone smiled for pictures. Parents hugged their children. Teachers wiped away tears. I stood in my cap and gown searching the crowd for my family. For a moment, I actually believed this day would be different. Maybe today, they would finally choose me. Halfway through the ceremony, my mother leaned toward me. "We have to leave a little early. Ethan's college orientation dinner starts in an hour." Before I could answer, they stood up and walked away. My name hadn't even been called yet. I watched them disappear through the stadium gate, just like I had watched them disappear every summer of my childhood. Only this time, I didn't cry. I smiled. Because my decision had already been made months earlier. That night, while the house slept peacefully, I quietly carried my blue suitcase downstairs. The same suitcase my parents had packed every June. This time, I packed it myself. I placed one letter on the kitchen table. I need a chance to discover who I am without spending my life trying to become someone you'll finally choose. There was no anger, no accusations, only goodbye. At 4 o'clock that morning, I drove away, not toward another temporary summer, toward a permanent future. 3 days later, I arrived in a quiet lakeside town nearly 2,000 miles away. It reminded me of Aunt Rose's farm. Peaceful, slow, honest. The owner of a small neighborhood bakery hired me as an assistant baker the very next day. The work was exhausting. I woke before sunrise, mixed dough until my arms hurt, cleaned ovens after everyone went home. But every paycheck carried something I'd never received from my parents: respect. For the first time, every success belonged entirely to me. Years passed faster than I expected. The shy little girl who once waited beside windows slowly disappeared. In her place stood a confident young woman who could manage a bakery, train employees, and greet customers with a genuine smile. When the owner finally decided to retire, she shocked me. I'd rather sell this bakery to someone who loves it than someone who only wants the money. She offered me an unbelievable payment plan. Everything I'd spent years saving suddenly had a purpose. The day I signed those papers, I stood alone inside the empty bakery after closing. I looked at my name printed across the ownership documents. For the first time in my life, I finally belonged somewhere. A few months later, a local magazine published an article about small businesses in town. There was a photograph of me standing beside a rack of fresh bread. The headline read, "Young Baker Revives Beloved Neighborhood Bakery." I never imagined anyone back home would see it. I was wrong. Exactly 11 days after the article appeared online, the bell above my bakery door rang. I looked up. My mother stood inside. Behind her, my father. Neither of us spoke. She slowly looked around the bakery. The display cases, the smiling customers, the framed certificates. Then she looked directly at me. "So, this is what you left your family for?" Not, "We've missed you." Not, "We're sorry." Just disappointment. I calmly poured 2 cups of coffee, not because they deserved kindness, but because I refused to let them take away the peace I'd worked so hard to build. After 20 minutes of small talk, my mother finally explained why they had come. "Your father has Parkinson's?" I looked toward Dad. His hands trembled as he stared into his coffee. Before I could even process the news, Mom continued, "Ethan has children. He has responsibilities. You've always been the dependable one. It's time to come home." There it was. Not love, not reconciliation, responsibility. Even after 4 years, my role in the family hadn't changed. I was still expected to carry everyone else's weight. I gently removed my hand from hers. "I'm not coming home." Her expression hardened. After everything we've sacrificed for you? I quietly answered. You never sacrificed for me. You sacrificed me. The silence inside the bakery became almost unbearable. That evening, my phone rang. It was Ethan. For the first time in our lives. We talked without Mom telling him what to say. He sounded confused. Claire, Mom always told me you loved spending summers with Aunt Rose. I laughed softly. I loved Aunt Rose. I hated the reason I was there. I told him everything. The packed suitcase. The postcards. The empty graduation seats. The years of pretending not to care. When I finished, he whispered, I never knew. I'm sorry. Those 3 words meant more than every postcard my parents had ever mailed. The next morning, I called Aunt Rose. She cried before she even said hello. Then she finally told me something she'd hidden for years. When I was 14, she had asked my parents to let me live with her permanently. She wanted to adopt me. She already had the paperwork ready. My mother refused. Not because she couldn't bear losing me, but because she was afraid people would ask why one child stayed while the other was sent away. My entire childhood had been protected by appearances, not love. A week later, I flew home for Thanksgiving. Not because my mother demanded it, because my father deserved the chance to see me one more time. Dinner looked exactly the way I remembered. Perfect table, perfect decorations, perfect family photographs, except nothing was actually perfect. Just before everyone began eating, my mother stood and smiled proudly. I have wonderful news. She looked around the table. Claire has decided to move back home and help care for her father. The room filled with applause. No one asked whether it was true. Just like every summer, my future had been planned without me. I slowly stood. I'm not moving home. The room fell silent. I've already arranged professional home care for Dad. I'll pay every bill. I'll visit him. I'll call every week. But I'm not giving up the life I built. My mother slammed her fork onto the table. Family comes first. I looked directly into her eyes. I spent 18 years waiting for my family to choose me. They never did, so I finally chose myself. My father slowly stood. His shaking hands reached into his jacket pocket. He handed me a folded envelope. Inside was an old receipt from a private investigator. Years earlier, he had secretly hired someone to search for me. At the bottom, he had written only one sentence. I should have fought harder. I looked into his eyes. For the first time, I saw regret. Real regret. I hugged him. Neither of us spoke. Sometimes, forgiveness begins where explanations finally end. 1 year later, Dad visited my bakery twice. Ethan brought his little daughter. She insisted on calling me Aunt Claire. Aunt Rose finally retired. I officially became the owner of the bakery she'd inspired me to dream about. The old blue suitcase still sits on top of a shelf in my office, but it no longer carries clothes. Now, it holds photographs, recipes, holiday decorations, memories I actually chose to keep. Every Thanksgiving, we push every table together and invite anyone who has nowhere else to go. No one eats alone. No one is forgotten. No one is treated like they matter less. Because I learned something my parents never did. Love isn't measured by who sacrifices the most. It's measured by who makes sure no one feels left behind. And every time I lock the bakery doors after Thanksgiving dinner, I smile, because the little girl who spent 9 summers watching her family drive away finally built a place where everyone is welcome to stay.